7 signs that God is about to bless you. Have you ever felt like you're walking through the darkest valley of your life? Your prayers seem to echo in silence, and God's promises feel distant? What if I told you that right now, in this very moment of uncertainty, God could be preparing your greatest blessing? Just like a seed must be buried in darkness before it breaks through to sunlight, your season of waiting might be the preparation for something extraordinary. In this video, I'll share 7 divine signs that have been confirmed through Scripture and witnessed in the lives of countless believers. These aren't just random coincidences. They're God's way of telling you, "Hold on, my child. Your blessing is closer than you think." If you're going through any of these signs right now, get ready. God might be orchestrating something bigger than you could ever imagine. Stay with me, because what I'm about to share could completely change how you see your current situation. Sign 1. You are facing greater trials than ever before. Think about this. Before a rocket launches into space, it faces its greatest resistance. The pressure builds, the engines roar, and for a moment, it seems like everything might fall apart. But that intense pressure, that's exactly what propels it beyond Earth's atmosphere. Right now, you might be experiencing challenges that seem overwhelming. Your faith is being stretched, your patience tested, and your strength pushed to its limits. But here's what you need to understand. God often allows His chosen ones to face their greatest trials right before their greatest triumphs. Look at Job, a man who lost everything in what seemed like a blink of an eye. His wealth, his children, his health, all stripped away. Even his wife told him to curse God and die. But what appeared to be an ending was actually God's setup for an extraordinary comeback. Not only did God restore Job's losses, He doubled his blessings. When David faced Goliath, when Moses stood before Pharaoh, when Daniel entered the lion's den, each of these moments of extreme trial preceded extraordinary victory. These weren't just biblical stories, they were patterns of how God works. So if you're facing unprecedented challenges today, if the opposition seems stronger than ever before, take heart. Remember this truth. Satan doesn't waste time attacking people who aren't a threat to his kingdom. The size of your trial often indicates the size of the blessing God has prepared for you. Your current struggle isn't a sign of God's absence, it's evidence of His preparation. Just as gold must endure the furnace to reach its highest purity, your trials are refining you for something greater than you've ever experienced before. Sign 2. Important relationships. Suddenly change. Have you noticed how certain relationships in your life are shifting unexpectedly? People you've known for years suddenly taking different paths, or connections you thought would last forever beginning to fade. This isn't random. It's often a divine orchestration. Consider Abraham's journey. God's first instruction to him wasn't about blessings or promises. It was about leaving. Leave your country, your people, and your father's household. What seemed like a painful separation was actually God's strategic positioning for something greater. Abraham had to leave the familiar to enter his destiny. Sometimes, God needs to create space in your life before He can fill it with new blessings. Just as a gardener prunes healthy branches to promote better growth, God occasionally needs to prune certain relationships to make room for what He's bringing next. This pruning isn't punishment, it's preparation. Joseph experienced this when his own brothers sold him into slavery. That betrayal, as painful as it was, positioned him exactly where he needed to be to eventually save nations. What looked like abandonment was actually divine appointment. This principle still holds true today. That friend who suddenly became distant, that business partnership that unexpectedly dissolved, that relationship that didn't work out. These might not be losses at all. They might be God's way of creating space for the connections that will be crucial for your next season. Remember, not everyone is meant to be part of your entire journey. Some people are like scaffolding, essential for a season of construction, but meant to be removed once that phase is complete. Their departure isn't a setback. It's often a setup for what God has next. Pay attention to these relationship shifts. If certain doors are closing, if certain people are moving in different directions, don't fight it. God might be orchestrating a divine repositioning that will align you perfectly with your coming blessing. Sign 3. You feel insecure and hungry for something bigger. There's a peculiar kind of divine discontentment that often precedes major breakthroughs. It's that nagging feeling that there must be more than this. Perhaps you've achieved everything you once dreamed of, yet somehow it feels incomplete. What used to satisfy you no longer does. Think about Moses in Egypt's palace. He had privilege, position, and power, everything the world would consider success. Yet something stirred within him, an unexplainable hunger for something more significant than royal comfort. That spiritual restlessness wasn't a curse. It was a divine calling awakening within him. This holy dissatisfaction is often God's way of preparing your heart for expansion. It's like an eagle stirring up its nest, making it uncomfortable so the eaglets will learn to fly. When you start feeling that your current situation is too small for your spirit, it's not ingratitude. It's often God expanding your capacity for what He's about to bring. Look at David. Even while successfully tending his father's sheep, he carried a warrior's heart that yearned for bigger battles. That inner knowing that you're meant for more isn't pride. It's often God's Spirit witnessing to your true calling. When you find yourself lying awake at night, dreaming of greater impact, when your prayers shift from asking for comfort to begging for purpose, when success by the world's standards no longer satisfies your soul, these are often signs that God is preparing you for a new level of assignment. This divine restlessness isn't about being ungrateful for what you have. Rather, it's about God awakening you to what He created you for. Just as a pregnant woman's body changes to prepare for new life, this spiritual hunger is often God preparing you for a new season of purpose and impact. If you're experiencing this holy discontent, don't suppress it. Instead, recognize it as a signal that God might be expanding your territory, preparing you for a blessing that requires a bigger vessel to contain it. Sign 4. Your faith is being tested. Have you noticed how your faith seems to be under intense scrutiny lately? Perhaps you're facing situations that challenge everything you believe about God's goodness. This isn't just a coincidence. It's often the final exam before graduation to your next level. Consider Abraham's story. God had promised him a son, waited until it was physically impossible, gave him Isaac, and then asked for him back as a sacrifice. This wasn't cruel. It was a divine setup. God wanted to establish whether Abraham trusted the promise giver more than the promise itself. The moment Abraham proved his faith was unshakable, God released the blessing and established His covenant. This pattern of testing before blessing isn't just an Old Testament principle. It's a spiritual law that still operates today. Think about it. A teacher doesn't test students to make them fail, but to promote them. Similarly, when God allows your faith to be tested, it's often because He's preparing to elevate you. These tests might look different for everyone. Perhaps you received a promise, but circumstances seem to be moving in the opposite direction. Maybe you're dealing with delayed answers to prayers that once seemed certain. Or you might be facing situations where choosing faith means going against conventional wisdom. But here's what makes these faith tests unique. They often push you beyond human reasoning. They require you to trust God's character when you can't trace His hand. Just like Peter had to step out of the boat when logic said, "Stay put," your current test might be asking you to trust God beyond what makes sense. Remember, faith isn't tested in comfort. It's proven in challenges. When God tested Gideon, He reduced his army from 32,000 to 300 before a major battle. Why? Because God wanted to demonstrate that victory wouldn't come from human strength, but divine intervention. If your faith is being stretched right now, if you're being pushed to trust God at a deeper level than ever before, take heart. This isn't a sign of God's absence. It's often the precursor to a demonstration of His power that will leave no doubt about who orchestrated your victory. Sign 5. Doors suddenly open. Have you ever noticed how God rarely opens doors gradually? Throughout Scripture, when God moves, He often moves suddenly. One day, Joseph was in prison. The next, he was second in command of Egypt. One moment, David was a shepherd. Then suddenly, he was standing before Goliath, on his path to becoming king. These divine doors often appear in unexpected places and at unexpected times. They might not look like what you imagined, but they align perfectly with where God is taking you. Think about Ruth. She went to glean in a field for survival, not knowing this ordinary task would lead her to Boaz and place her in the lineage of Christ. What makes these divine doors unique is that they often make no sense to human logic. When God told Peter to cast his nets on the other side after a night of failed fishing, it defied his professional experience. But that act of obedience led to his biggest catch ever. Sometimes, the doors God opens might seem too simple, too challenging, or too unconventional. But that's often how you know they're divine. Pay attention to those subtle nudges, those coincidental meetings, those unexpected opportunities. When Mordecai told Esther about the plot against her people, it wasn't just bad news. It was a divine door opening for her to step into her destiny. Sometimes, what looks like a problem is actually God's opportunity in disguise. Here's the key. When God opens these doors, no one can shut them. Remember Philadelphia's church in Revelation? God promised them an open door that no one could close. The same holds true today. When God decides it's your time, no human opposition, no circumstance, no past mistake can prevent what He has ordained. But these divine doors require two things: discernment to recognize them and courage to walk through them. Like Moses at the burning bush, you need to turn aside from your normal routine to see what God is doing. And like Esther approaching the king's throne, you need courage to step through these doors, even when the path ahead isn't completely clear. If you're seeing unexpected opportunities arise, if paths are opening that you didn't engineer, pay attention. This could be God setting the stage for your next blessing. Sign 6. You see small signs of God's promises. Think about a farmer who plants seeds in spring. Long before the harvest, he sees tiny green shoots breaking through the soil. These aren't the full harvest, but they're evidence that something is happening beneath the surface. God often works the same way in our lives. Remember the story of Elijah on Mount Carmel? After 3 years of drought, he saw a cloud the size of a man's hand. It wasn't the full rain yet, but it was evidence that the drought was about to end. Those small signs were God's way of saying, "Keep watching, I'm about to do something bigger." These signs might appear insignificant to others, but they're precious to those who understand their meaning. Like when Noah saw the dove return with an olive leaf, it wasn't the full dry land he needed, but it was evidence that God's promise was unfolding. These small manifestations are like God's down payment on a bigger blessing He's bringing. Sometimes these signs come as partial answers to prayer. Perhaps you're believing for complete healing, and you notice small improvements. Maybe you're praying for financial breakthrough, and you receive an unexpected small gift. These aren't the full manifestation, but they're evidence that God is moving in that area of your life. The Israelites saw the promised land from a distance before they possessed it. Joshua and Caleb brought back grapes so large they had to carry them on poles between two men. These weren't just fruits. They were physical evidence of God's promise. Similarly, the small victories you're experiencing now might be samples of greater blessings God has prepared. Don't despise these small beginnings. Like the first light of dawn before sunrise, they might seem faint, but they're announcing something greater. When David killed the lion and bear in private, these were small signs preparing him for his public victory over Goliath. If you're seeing small confirmations of what God has promised you, celebrate them. They're not just coincidences. They're often God's way of saying, keep believing. The full manifestation is on its way. Sign 7. You have extraordinary peace in the midst of adversity. There's a peculiar kind of peace that sometimes descends in the middle of life's biggest storms. It's not the absence of trouble. It's the presence of an inexplicable calm when everything around you suggests you should be worried. This supernatural peace is often God's signature before a major breakthrough. Remember Jesus in the boat during the storm? While the disciples panicked, he was sleeping peacefully. This wasn't denial or indifference. It was divine confidence. He knew something the others didn't. The storm wasn't a threat to God's plan. That same peace can be a sign that God is about to move powerfully in your situation. Daniel demonstrated this peace when he was thrown into the lion's den. Instead of staying up all night worrying, the Bible tells us he slept while the king paced in anxiety. This peace wasn't based on the circumstances. The lions were still real and dangerous. It was based on something deeper, the knowledge that God was in control. This kind of peace often arrives when it makes the least sense. When Paul and Silas sang hymns at midnight in prison, their backs bleeding from beatings, they weren't just being optimistic. They were experiencing supernatural peace that preceded their miraculous deliverance. Their chains fell off, but their peace came first. What makes this peace remarkable is that it often comes before any visible change in your circumstances. Like the calm before a mighty move of God, this peace is often your spirit bearing witness that heaven is about to intervene. It's not just positive thinking. It's spiritual discernment that God is orchestrating something beyond what your eyes can see. If you're experiencing this kind of inexplicable calm in the face of challenges that should be overwhelming you, pay attention. When your friends ask, "How can you be so peaceful in this situation?" it might not be just your good attitude. It could be God's Spirit indicating that He's about to demonstrate His power in your situation. This peace is often the final sign before a divine breakthrough. Like the stillness before dawn, it whispers that light is about to break through your darkness. As we've explored these 7 divine signs, take a moment to reflect. How many of these signs are you experiencing right now? Perhaps you recognized one, or maybe several of them resonated deeply with your current situation. This isn't coincidence. It's divine coordination. You see, God's timing is perfect, even when it doesn't align with our schedule. Just as a master craftsman knows exactly when to remove gold from the fire, our Father knows precisely when to bring forth your blessing. Every trial you're facing, every relationship that's shifted, every moment of supernatural peace, these are all part of His perfect preparation. Remember the words of Galatians 6:9. Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. This promise isn't just beautiful poetry, it's a divine guarantee. The key phrase here is proper time. God's delays are not His denials, they're His preparations. Think about the heroes of faith we've discussed: Job, Abraham, Joseph, Daniel. Each of them went through a season of preparation before their breakthrough. What separated them from others wasn't the absence of challenges, but their persistence in faith when everything seemed contrary to God's promises. Right now, you might be in what feels like a waiting room, but God's waiting rooms are actually preparation rooms. Every day you choose to trust Him. Every moment you decide to believe despite what your eyes see. You're building spiritual muscles that will be essential for carrying the weight of your coming blessing. Don't allow the enemy to convince you that God has forgotten you. These signs we've discussed are evidence that He's actively working in your situation. Your prayers aren't just hitting the ceiling, they're being woven into God's master plan for your life. The very fact that you're hearing this message today could be God's way of strengthening your faith for the final stretch before your breakthrough. Sometimes the darkest hour truly is just before dawn, and your dawn might be closer than you think. Here's a profound truth that every believer needs to understand. God's greatest works often begin in silence. Like a seed germinating underground, like a baby forming in the womb, the most significant blessings often start invisible to human eyes. But when God's appointed time arrives, these blessings manifest with a suddenness that takes our breath away. Just as Joseph went from prison to palace in a single day, just as the Red Sea parted in a moment after months of seeming impossibility, your breakthrough could be right around the corner. The question isn't if God will move, but whether you'll be positioned in faith when He does. So what should you do while you're waiting? Stay faithful in prayer. Continue serving. Keep your heart pure. These aren't just religious activities. They're spiritual preparations for what God is about to release in your life. Like a farmer preparing his fields before the rain, your faithfulness now is setting the stage for your future harvest. Remember this: God has never been early, He's never been late, but He has always been worth the wait. Every promise in His Word is yes and amen. Every tear you've cried, every prayer you've prayed, every moment of faithfulness in the dark, He's seen it all, and He's preparing to reward your faith in ways that will astound you. Don't give up now. You may be closer to your breakthrough than you've ever been. Sometimes the greatest test of faith comes right before the greatest demonstration of God's power. Stay in position. Keep your eyes on Him. Your season of preparation is about to give way to your season of manifestation. The same God who parted seas, who raised the dead, who turned water into wine, He's still in the miracle-working business today. And if you're seeing any of these 7 signs in your life, get ready. Your time of divine visitation might be closer than you think. Remember, when God moves, He often moves suddenly. Will you be ready? Will you be found faithful? Your blessing isn't just about you, it's about God's glory being displayed through your life. Stay faithful, stay ready, and watch as God transforms your trial into triumph.